question here, and then I'm going to bring the microphone up to that side of the room if we can. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a very detail-oriented fanboy question.
Go.
Oh dear.
You must hate those. It is with the maesters who all forge their own links for the each subject that they master. Valyrian steel is not supposed to be known how to be made, but two of the maesters have Valyrian steel links. Eamon and Archmaester Marwyn.
But Valyrian steel can be reworked. They can't make new Valyrian steel, but as you see, when the twin swords of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail are created in King's Landing, you can take existing Valyrian steel and rework it.
Oh, you thought you had him, and you're so wrong. You were so wrong.
Hello everyone. I'm about to say something which may be controversial. The death of the author is inevitable. Now, I am talking in this video about the concept of literary interpretation, coined by French theorist Roland Barthes in his essay from 1967 called The Death of the Author. However, I want you to forget about that semantic association for a moment and imagine a world where such a divisive essay never surfaced. I want you to see the statement on its own terms, as though I am not referring to anything contingent on a preconceived notion which results in a capitalized noun. This might seem pedantic, but I think we often get bogged down on the theoretical. We get entangled in the scholarship spaghetti to the point of finding ourselves coming to the conclusion that the author is immortal and will never perish. You see, Roland Barthes could not have thought of a better name for his theory if he tried. The death of the author. Yes, we often idolize authors whom we love, whose work has defined us. We almost deify them. But the author of any book is a mere mortal, a human being whose time is finite, who will inevitably die. And what happens when the author dies? J.R.R. Tolkien of The Lord of the Rings died in 1973. And since then, people haven't been able to, for example, ask for Tolkien's interpretation on whether Frodo and Samwise were gay. Tolkien hasn't been able to defend himself when people suggest the orcs in his books were racist caricatures, despite him being anti-racist both in peace times and during both world wars. And Tolkien, who was an outspoken anti-industrialist, did not have a say when Amazon acquired the rights to some of his works. Indeed, when the author dies, everything seems up for grabs. Sensationalist nonsense prevails, and this almost comes across as an argument against the death of the author. Nevertheless, however unattractive the death of the author is as a concept, the death of the author is inevitable. So with that understood, why do we repudiate the demise of the writer whose works are to be interpreted? Why do we prolong the fervent reliance and sometimes docile servitude towards what the author decides is canon, but did not include in the original text? Why do this when we will inevitably have to deliberate over our interpretations without the subjective yet arbitrary perspective of the author? Upon the death of the author, we will instead be left with objectivity, with the process of debating over the text using references found only in the text itself. Why don't we just interpret the text with objectivity now, rather than later, and collectively hone our ability to do so before we are forced to take away the training wheels of consulting the author when they pass away? Sure, before J.R.R. Tolkien passed away, an abundance of archived videos and texts capturing his views on his own works and general world philosophies were recorded, and it is true that these can be referenced in order to bolster one's interpretation of The Lord of the Rings. There is a reason Tolkien's stance on industrialization is public knowledge. However, because Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings with such clarity and vibrance, his anti-industrialism shines through and renders any meta-context completely superficial. It might be reading between the lines, but again, when all is said and done, that's all we can do. When the author is no longer with us, we have only their legacy. The content posthumously available featuring Tolkien may be plentiful, but it's not infinite, The moment discussion lays on a topic for which there exists no record of Tolkien's opinions, we are left with objectivity. Christopher Tolkien, his son, had his opinions as a person probably closest to the author and most likely to accurately portray his father's inhibitions. But even that would be a fallacious way to seek evidence towards a thesis for interpretation. What if Christopher Tolkien just misremembered something his father once told him? Before making this video, I consulted other video and text-based essays on the death of the author, and the inevitability of the death of the author, the human being, the person behind the books, is rarely or never acknowledged as far as I could see. Given that, I am left to suppose that a response to my statement would be that, while the death of the author is inevitable, we should act like it isn't. We should in fact consider the author's perspective as gospel, and when left to objectivity we should mitigate our own views with the presumption that anything we assert about the text is necessarily secondary to what the author would have said were they alive today. That the importance to understand the context in which the writer wrote, the time period of the day, the philosophies they harbored when putting pen to paper, absolutely supersedes anything we as the readers might say, regardless of how compelling and/or objective our references appear. This I believe to be not only catastrophically wrong, but latently detrimental to our ability to read and write. In the long term, I think it would be limiting for any human being's ability to read and write in order to communicate their ideas to another. I believe we all have a desire to impart our thoughts into discernible and tangible material while minimizing external influence as much as possible. As an inspiring writer trying to hone my craft, I've been thinking about this a lot. With everything I write, down to each individual sentence, I tend to remind myself that there will come a time when I will not be around to clarify any potential discrepancies found in my texts. In doing this, I find the resolve to narrate my stories with the most internal consistency I can muster, and to be very intentional with what narrative elements I render airtight, and which elements I otherwise allow leeway for open and versatile interpretation. Yet even in doing this, I cannot arbitrate what will and won't be interpreted in a way I had not originally intended. Rather, I can only hope that prevailing objective argumentation, bolstered by references I include in the text, rise to the surface. I believe the death of the author is an absolute that benefits our ability to read and write. If one subscribes to this thesis, they might refrain from scouring the internet for the author to tell them what to think about a text. They might instead improve their reading comprehension, or challenge their own opinions by debating and discussing the text with other readers. Debating with their peers who may provide an objective argument which compels them to change perspective, even if those persuasive arguments are coming from readers and not the author. On the other hand, other readers can be wrong about a body of work, but likewise, so can the author about their own work. This may appear to be a bold and understandably controversial statement, yet it's innately true. It merely points out the non-0% chance of a potentiality. It is not impossible for an author to be wrong about their own work. This is not the same as saying it is common. In fact, I would allow that it's quite unlikely. Astronomically unlikely. Although the fact they can be wrong, however minuscule the probability and regardless of how they could be wrong, this explodes the conversation into infinity. The potential for the author to be wrong forces us to question everything. It's a chain reaction of contemplation. It concerns the boundary between when an author is correct about their own work and when they are not. When the authors are quote-unquote wrong about their own works, it is often a murky subjectivity, even when the backlash from the readers against the author's perspective is overwhelming. To be honest, I find these conversations either delve too far beneath the tip of the iceberg within fiction world's canon, or they are very superficial and made to produce headlines. Whether or not we are supposed to root for Paul Atreides and Dune, and read him as the traditional hero despite Frank Herbert's true intentions for him to be a messianic avatar of terror, and a criticism of religion colluding with politics, or whether Dumbledore was gay in Harry Potter, is both subjective. One incites interesting discussion, and one is just lame and pointless and really adds nothing to the interpretation of the story. However, what if the authors make sequels and retcon things? Both sci-fi author Frank Herbert and the film director Todd Phillips were alive too in response to fans getting the wrong idea from their portrayal of their written protagonist, make a sequel in order to arbitrarily make their opinions on their own work canon, as though to give power to the interpretation by the fans by, quite frankly, seeming desperate to change the narrative. Not that the power of any given fanbase to adopt the reality that a terrible collection of sequels were not canon should be underestimated, but I would say sequels do officiate somewhat the author's arbitrary views. Now, I could desperately try to find examples of how authors could be wrong about their own works, but the how to me seems irrelevant, especially when the statements of the author could be wrong about their own work, and it is impossible for the author to be wrong about their own work. There's a clear winner there. No, I think that cases which are far more plentiful, which are the ones where the author is right about their own work, is far more interesting for the purpose of this video, because it's about why they are right. In this clip, George R.R. Martin is confronted by a fan during a Q&A who thinks they have discovered a plot hole in the world of Ice and Fire. In this scenario, George debunked the criticism, not by citing his personal experience, nor by stating the zeitgeist of when he wrote it, nor did he come up with a contrived and ad hoc explanation on the spot. Instead, he notes that Valyrian steel can be smelted and reworked to forge different items.
The twin swords of Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail are created in King's Landing. You can take existing Valyrian steel and rework it.
Wow. One owned by the author, the living author, who was alive to disprove the fan's theory. Except it wasn't necessary for the defendant of this case to be the author at all. It could have been a debate between one reader and another, and the same would have transpired. In the second book of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Storm of Swords, while it is clear that Valyrian steel cannot be made anew due to the lost secret of forgery from Old Valyria, it could be reworked. We know this because Tywin Lannister smelted down Eddard Stark's greatsword Ice in order to reforge it into smaller swords, Oathkeeper and Widow's Wail.
No one's made a Valyrian steel sword since the Doom of Valyria.
There are 3 living smiths who know how to rework Valyrian steel. The finest of them was in Volantis. He came here to King's Landing at my invitation.
Though it helps to be the author to conjure up a response on the spot, versus a fan like me who might have to look up a reference, perhaps to make a video, for example. No, we learn that if you are equipped with the references from the book itself to back your argument, then you have the same capacity of interpretation as the author. Although the death of the author is inevitable, their legacy will live on. Readers, fans, and even critics alike will gush or debate over their works forever. It is often the best stories which survive this gauntlet. When they are still alive, authors convey their beliefs and canon with a good understanding and relationship with their own mortality, so that for posterity we had something to be inspired by. This is a motivation not to pursue answers and to be told what to think, but write something of our own that is reflective of what we see in other stories, where fellow readers or even the author fail to see. The death of the author is inevitable, and it is absolute, but it also has limited power over the responsible reader, because I believe the responsible reader would never be so reliant on the authorial intent of a book in order to review or criticise its content, would never have indeed discriminated against another's point of view simply because they were not the authors. We all become the responsible reader in the end, forced to become so due to the inevitability of the death of the author.